The Bold New Normal Conference 2025 is here, and this year we are transforming through the power of language and culture. Tickets out now.
When the Caribbean was hit by hurricanes in 2017, news networks across the globe carried the story. The news coverage conveyed compassion for the great loss people were experiencing. I could relate. For one, my mother-in-law is from the Caribbean. Secondly, it had been only a couple of years since torrential rain and subsequent flooding had led to an explosion in Accra that killed almost 200 people on the spot. It was the most horrific scene I had ever seen. I pause as I write because the images come flooding back. I only watched on TV and wish I could unsee what I saw. People of Ghana, my people, burnt alive. Using the words charred bodies makes me squeamish. Yet there they were, charred in the aftermath of the explosion. Even through the screen, the pain was palpable. How do you comfort a woman who loses her grip on her child, only to later realize that her child was gone for good? As you look into her eyes through the screen, you wish there was more that you could do than just empathize. So you can understand my intrigue with the Caribbean news reports. I was intrigued that in the midst of all the pain and loss, the news reports of the Caribbean disaster were also immediately and equally concerned with estimates of how much it would cost to rebuild. Yes, this was a natural disaster. Yes, the impact will have to be assessed and lessons learned, but it all had to be rebuilt. Why didn't I hear this over the June 3rd disaster, which was the rains in Accra? It got me thinking though. I wondered how many African leaders ever estimate the cost to build our countries. How much would it cost and how long would it take to bring the average African standard of living to the level of the average person in a developed economy? What would it take to do so? Or better still, do we even recognize the need to build at scale and fully establish African countries? Outcomes, plans, cost, execution, and so much more. More like what policies need to change, which agreements need to be revisited. That was an excerpt of what is the introduction of the Bold New Normal. And it's a story that intrigued me because I experienced it firsthand, and I tell you so much more about the full story in the book. So grab a copy if you haven't read the book yet. Today, coming to you on this podcast, there's so many thoughts flooding through my mind that took me back to this story from my book. A few weeks ago, episode 3 of The Bold New Normal went out, and it specifically focused on the idea of stories and stories that we tell ourselves and stories that we tell our countries. So I won't rehash all of that, but the stories and our narratives are extremely important, and I would encourage you to go and watch it and listen to it if you haven't done so already. Now, another reason why this story from the book came to mind is that very recently a young lady who had read the book wrote to me and said that the way she related to the story about the hurricanes and the flooding and the need to estimate the cost to rebuild was that she thought about herself. She personalized it. She personalized it in the context of her Bold New Normal and asked herself the question, what would it take to really build the life that she wants, the life that she believes to be possible? I loved her feedback because I always love it when people reach out to me and write to me and tell me what they glean from the book or from anything other thing that I put out. And she's right. I talk about the cost to rebuild a nation to where it needs to be, but it starts on a personal level, on our individual level. What would it cost us to build out the vision of the life that we truly want?
The Bold New Normal Conference 2025 is here, and this year we are transforming through the power of language and culture. Tickets out now.
And so I thought I'd come here today and share a few thoughts, tips on some of the things that you should consider as you create your prosperous future. And as I've said in the past, prosperity is personalized. It's not about whether people have lots of money or not. It's about whether people have the opportunity to thrive and self-actualize. This is so important because really as human beings, this is what we're looking for. So grab your pen and paper and let's learn together and share these tips of how we really create that future that we want. The first thing I would say to you is raise the bar. In fact, raise your bar. So you need to redefine your expectations. Have the courage to think and dream of possibilities that may seem far away from where you're starting from. Because if the dream doesn't scare you sufficiently enough, and I know you've heard this before, but let's make it tangible. Raise your bar of how far you think you can go in articulating your vision. For me, I've had several times of raising my bar. I raise a bar and then I raise another bar and then I raise another bar. And a lot of you have heard me talk in the context of my career. But one of the bars that I raised for myself growing up was the bar of the life my children should have. So raising your bar is not just about one particular aspect of your life. You have to define all the areas of your life that are important to you and raise the bar. Have the courage to define what may seem scary, what may seem impossible. You know, one of the stories that I remember from when I was about 12 years old or 13 thereabout was with my grandmother. And I was lighting a wooden fire. And those of you who have experiences from rural areas in Ghana and across Africa, it's like a tripod of 3 mounds of clay, dried clay, and then you stick the firewood sort of in between and you light it. So it comes out really, really smoky, but it does generate enough heat to cook, but also the tripod there allows you to situate your saucepan or whatever your cooking utensil is. And I was getting all this smoke in my eyes and I was coughing and complaining. And my grandmother, in her good nature, said, well, you really need to know how to do this as a woman, I guess as an African woman, because you'll need to cook meals for your family. And I said to my grandma, oh no, grandma, I'm not having this kind of cooking device in my home. And she was really cross with me. She meant well, but she felt it was a little bit arrogant of me. Well, it wasn't arrogant at all, and I wasn't rude, let me be clear. I was just explaining to her my expectations. But the truth of the matter is, it's a simple example of raising the bar. It's a simple example of us aspiring and striving to have a different outcome to what's around you. So they may be small, they may be big, but raise the bar. Number 2 is you need to be intentional. Creating prosperity isn't about just having a pipe dream and just wishful thinking. Being intentional means you make choices and decisions that align with what you're trying to achieve. You have to be intentional, have the courage to give some things up. There's that word courage again. To give some friendships up, to give some relationships up, and choose what aligns with where you're trying to get to. So be intentional. Do not be afraid to be intentional about creating the future that you want to create for yourself. Now, that leads me on to the third thing, which is about being diligent, right? Being diligent, paying attention to every detail, making sure that while you've raised the bar and you're intentional, you're diligent about it. Diligent means that you care enough to keep prioritizing where you're trying to get to. Now, I'm not suggesting that by extension we become selfish. I think service is extremely important. And if that bar you raise could actually be in service of others, you will find so much more joy and fulfillment in achieving it. But be diligent in protecting that vision, that bar that you have raised where you're trying to get to. Be very diligent about it and keep going step by step by step by step on that journey. Which then takes us to our 4th point, and I hope you're writing, be consistent. It's easy to be consistent in what I may term our old ways, our old habits, our old behaviors, the things that are not taking us to where we need to get to. But hey ho, this is how I've been all my life. So, I will just be there and this is how I am. That's not the kind of consistency I'm talking about. I'm talking about the consistency when you've raised your bar, you're being intentional, you're being diligent, and you're mindful that you have to keep doing it over and over again. And I'm not talking weeks or months, I'm talking years, sometimes decades, to really get to where you're trying to be. Of course, there'll be wins along the way, and we'll talk about those in a moment, but be consistent. Sometimes we all fall off the bandwagon. We fall off the bandwagon of our consistency. We lose our footing. We make mistakes. Not everything works the way that we wanted to. Sometimes we find ourselves lost in staying focused on our aims and our visions, but it behoves us to retrace our steps and get back to that consistency. Now, one of the tools that I think is extremely useful when it comes to consistency is having somebody, at least one person, if not many, who keep you honest and keep your feet on the ground, effectively an accountability partner who can hold you to account and to say, well, you said this is where you're trying to get to. This is what you're trying to do daily, weekly, monthly. How is it going? How do we, let's have a check-in and see how you're progressing. Life is real. There's no such thing as a life without challenges. If anyone tells you that they have found a formula to conjure up a life that comes with absolutely no challenges, I would say run a mile. And so this next point is really important. There will be obstacles. Make a note of it. I've had times when I expected to get a job that didn't happen. Challenges where sometimes you have to stand up for your integrity. You have to deal with someone who's really difficult, or you have to accept the fact that it is time to change course, or times when, for instance, a plan that you had is working, but you have to make a different choice for the right reasons. Obstacles are real. Life is real. Life will throw curveballs sometimes. And I encourage you to not only embrace obstacles and challenges, but learn from them. Those are the times that can lead to the greatest growth in our life, because we're put in this position that we didn't expect, and we have to draw on new strength or find new strength, find new solutions, find new journey partners. Just figure out in solving for the obstacle how we get around it. And so it may sound odd when you say, well, Lucy, you were telling me like points that I should note to really thrive and move forward. And now you're suddenly telling me about the difficulty. The difficulty is actually part of the magic of the journey. So embrace obstacles and step away from this idea that every time there's an obstacle, the first thing you have to do is find who's the scapegoat, who to blame. And I've seen this many times when people want to be able to pin their obstacle, their challenge on someone else. And if you're African, someone might end up actually being a witch in your eyes. Let's not give witches and witchcraft all the credit. Obstacles are a real part of life. Valleys are where we grow. Valleys are where we discover things about ourselves. Valleys are where we are prepared for the next step, because sometimes that bar that I told you to raise, you haven't got all it takes to be that person. But those obstacles, those valleys, those challenges are what will prepare you, because they will force you to get new skills, new tools, new people in your network, new perspectives. So many new things will happen to you as you deal with obstacles. But one thing I always say to my children every time they run into a challenge is I said, don't lose the lesson. We're in this phase and you're going to get through it. But if you don't learn the lessons that are embedded in this time and season of your life, you will find that same obstacle in another form in the future. And you would have lost the opportunity to get past this.
The Bold New Normal Conference 2025 is here. And this year we are transforming through the power of language and culture. Tickets out now.
One quick story I have here that comes to mind as I speak is I had an old boss several years ago, and he was difficult. I mean, when I talk about difficult, he was difficult to the extent that I had to psych myself up every single morning. I mean, I'd do my devotional and I'd pray and all that, but I actually then had to go for a walk, meditate. I had these books I would read, especially Rick Warren, and I'd read a chapter and I'd go and sort of reflect. But it was all part of preparing me for the day. Can you imagine? But one of the things that I believe I didn't really capture in that season wasn't so much the need to prepare for the day and how to deal with him. I was so focused on him that I think I lost sight of the opportunity for me to be changed, right? And so guess what? Several years later, when we had both changed companies, I joined a new company, and lo and behold, he was my boss again. And I said, Lord, you have a sense of humor. Yes, I get it. Now teach me all that I need to know and change me in all the ways that I need to be changed, because this is clearly a lesson, an obstacle in the past, but I didn't learn the full lessons, and I'm back to learn my lessons. And so I did. I dealt with him completely differently. I was a very different person in engaging him, and that's a story for another time. But I learned a lot about myself and how to carry myself into the future through the experience the second time round, because this time I wasn't so much about how am I just going to get through dealing with him daily, but how am I going to be the person that actually this won't be a challenge for in future. Right, I hope you're taking lots of notes. Next point, celebrate the wins. There will be several smaller wins along the way. Things that you expected to go well, or things that unexpectedly went well. Whatever the situation is, whatever the outcome, celebrate. Be joyful. Celebrations can be something as simple as just having a nice meal that you even cooked yourself. But what my coach once said to me is that buy yourself something nice, that every time you look at it, you will remember that win. Now, why is this important? Remember my previous point about obstacles and challenges? When we're facing challenges, we need reminders of what we're capable of. We need reminders of what is possible. Embedded in that, whether it was a meal, but ideally a physical object that you like and you see, embedded in that is the story of how it came about, the story that led you to that purchase. It's the story that led you to actually making the effort to acquire that item. And that story is part of your story. And so celebrating a win, whether it is through buying yourself something, telling the story to a friend who will remind you in future, or some activity that you will reminisce on, it is your way of creating positive stories for yourself that will propel you and keep you going. Now, I'm on my last but one point. And here's the last but one point, service. If there's one word above all that I'd love you to remember from today's podcast is the word service. Yes, we have a responsibility for growth, a responsibility for personal development, for progress, all of these good things. But I believe that more than anything else, we draw our greatest satisfaction from being of service to others. And it could be in small things, it could be in big things. But as you craft this journey and you move along this journey, don't make your journey entirely self-serving. The more your journey can be of service to others, the more you will actually enjoy the journey and not only think about the destination, but be grateful for the journey itself. The more people you will take along the way, and in fact, the impact of your journey will be far greater than anything you could even imagine, even in your highest bar. You know, I'm always fascinated when I read about people who have retired or are retiring and suddenly thinking about their legacy, concerned about how they'll be remembered, scrambling for who to help in their journey. And it's a good thing to do in your retirement. But what if, just what if, you created room to serve while you were still on your journey? What if the impact of your existence and your being far outweighed what you personally did for yourself and was more manifested in the service that you provided to others? Just think about that. I love the idea of service, and while it is not always easy to serve, if you have a heart of service, you will find opportunities to serve. So now to the last point for today. And my last point centers on an important leadership concept. Yet it's really basic. The truth of the matter is that it's a basic leadership concept, but we don't practice it enough. And I'm adding this point, especially for those of you who have great ambitions, who are doing things on a large scale, whether it is in a company, in your family, in the nation. Communicate. Communicate, 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 communicate. You want your journey to have a multiplier effect, communicate. Don't hide in your little corner. Communicate for insight, communicate for ideas, but communicate to inspire, communicate to take other people along with you. Communicate, 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 communicate. Now, I can hear some of you at this point going, but Lucy, I'm not a good communicator. Everyone can communicate because it is part of who you are fundamentally as a human being. Does it mean that we all do it really well? Not necessarily, but remember, there's several forms of communication. One of the things I love about podcasts is that it allows me to reach you verbally and visually, right? But there's written communication. There's communication that's in pictures and images and photography and video. There's so many different forms of communication. And sometimes a communication is as simple as capturing the story to retell yourself, as I said earlier, but we need stories that can carry us forward and carry others forward and bring them along with us. And especially if you're aspiring to national position because you really want to bring about change in your nation, you want to bring about change in your family, you want to bring about change in your company, in your community, learn to hone your communication skills. So important. Right. I think now you can put your pens down. This feels a little bit like we had an exam. I would love to hear from you on this one, but you can put your pens down now. I really encourage you, as many people have done, to grab a copy of The Bold New Normal. It's on Amazon. It's in Ghana at Book Nook. Grab a copy, have a read more of the stories that are relevant to creating your bold new normal, creating your prosperity, and drop me a line. You can drop me a line on social media at Lucy Quist or The Bold New Normal, but just come along and tell me what you think about today's podcast and the book. Thank you. Thank you for tuning in to The Bold New Normal. I hope this episode has inspired you to think boldly and take action towards creating the future you envision. If you found value in today's conversation, don't forget to subscribe, leave a review, and share this episode with someone who needs a dose of boldness today. Until next time, take action to create your bold new normal.
The Bold New Normal Conference 2025 is here, and this year we are transforming through the power of language and culture. Tickets out now.